16 is a Canadian animated comedy drama television series that aired for 4 seasons and 93 episodes from 2004 to 2010. It follows the lives of 6 16-year-old friends who work part-time jobs at the Galleria Mall, a fictional shopping complex based on the Toronto Eaton Centre and the West Edmonton Mall. The show revolves around the characters' adventures and as they deal with the typical teenage issues, such as crushes, relationships, friendships, school, and jobs. One of the biggest reasons that the show was such a huge hit was its diverse group of characters. A lot of rebellious kids could relate to Nikki Wong, the purple-haired, quick-witted, and sarcastic girl with nose piercings. In contrast, Jen Masterson represented the strong-willed, athletic, and responsible elder sibling character that every family has. Meanwhile, we all know a Caitlin Cook, the friend who we love to mock for their very elitist upbringing, but they eventually win us over with their fierce loyalty and kindness. Many of us could also see ourselves in Wyatt Williams, the musically talented, soft-spoken, and anxiety-ridden boy. In school, we all had a Jonesy Garcia, a lazy but confident guy who flirted with every woman under the sun. And last but not least, Jude Lizowisk is an absent-minded, mellowed-out skater boy who constantly surprises everyone with his wisdom. Episode 1. The story begins on a typical day at the bustling Galleria Mall when Caitlin and her friend Trisha walk in. They discuss plans for the day and decide to meet up for manicures after lunch. After this, they split up to peruse the mall for great clothes and great deals. Meanwhile, in another part of the mall, Jonesy and Nikki meet Wyatt at the lemonade stand Big Squeeze. The group of friends are proud of themselves today as they plan to get a job at the mall. Jen has an interview at the sports store Penalty Box and plans to escape her awful job at the Big Squeeze. Unfortunately for Jen, she still has to work there today, wearing her silly lemon hat. Her job isn't made any easier when Caitlin comes by and orders a drink not on the menu. When Jen tells her that she can only have the items on the menu, Caitlin readily orders a lemonade and then tries to pay with a credit card when Jen won't accept her credit card. Caitlin hands over a $50 bill and then asks for directions to the pastry store. Nice Cinnabons. As soon as she leaves, Jen and Nikki begin talking to each other. The duo is envious of her, as they figure she'll never have to work a day in her life because of her wealthy parents. And their analysis of Caitlin is not that far off as she heads to the clothing store Khaki Barn to continue shopping without worrying about money. However, her credit card is declined at the cash register due to her expenses going over the credit limit. She is shocked to learn that credit cards have limits and is even more surprised when her father refuses to set things right in her mind. Instead of raising the credit limit, her father decides that Caitlin has to get a job to pay him back for her credit card bill. Meanwhile, at the Big Squeeze, the 5 friends head off to their interviews. There, most of them find themselves in deep trouble. While Jen aces every question Coach Halder throws her way, everyone else flounders to come up with answers. On the other hand, Caitlin, who is also sitting in an interview, finds herself being distracted by the prospects of employee discounts and uniforms. When their interviews finally end, everyone but Jen finds themselves back in the food court without landing any jobs. When Jen shows up, she realizes that she may be working alone at the mall again this year. Caitlin is also crying at a nearby table as she couldn't get a job either. Nikki takes a crack at calling her a professional shopper before she and her friends head out to apply for other jobs in the mall. Meanwhile, Jen still needs to find somebody to take her job. When looking over the applicants, she realizes that none of them fit right, so she offers it to the newly impoverished Caitlin. Initially reluctant to take the offer, she eventually begins training under Jen. Thankfully, all the others also find jobs at the mall. Jude is now the manager of Stick It, a fast food stand, and Wyatt is hired at Spin, this music store, to work the country music section. And Jonesy's employed at the soda hop stand, but is fired 10 minutes later when he hits on the boss's daughter. However, Nikki takes a position that she is unwilling to discuss in front of her friends. Meanwhile, at the Big Squeeze, Caitlin is having a difficult time adapting to work. While reaching for her phone, Caitlin clumsily knocks it into the blender and then accidentally turns on the blender and destroys her phone. This latest act of incompetence is the last straw for Jen, who is sick of putting up with Caitlin's inability to do the most straightforward job. Jen begins to yell at Caitlin for her lack of responsibility, but Coach Halder hears her while walking through the food court and comes over to fire her from the penalty box. However, Caitlin points out that everything Jen said was justified as she has been nothing but patient. Finally, Caitlin finishes her speech by telling the coach that he'd be lucky to have an employee like Jen. Upon hearing this, Coach Halder rethinks his decision and decides to let Jen work at his store. As soon as he leaves, Jen's friends congratulate Caitlin on standing up for Jen, and she happily accepts their praise. The group decides at this moment to make her a part of the group. After the fuss dies down, Nikki stands up as she has to start training that day. Friends ask her again where she's working, but she refuses to tell them. As soon as she leaves, they follow Nikki to her workplace. There, they find out that she's been forced to take a job at the khaki barn. Nikki has always been a rebel, while her new workplace openly expects its employees to put up a fake smile and be cheerful 24/7. Watching this mismatch, the group of friends laugh at Nikki's bad luck. Episode 2. Barely a few weeks into their new jobs, everyone is already fed up with work. Caitlin has to deal with demanding customers all the time, Nikki has to deal with the dull environment of the khaki barn, Wyatt has to deal with Spin This having a sale on country music, and Jen's boss, Coach Halder, is acting overbearing as usual. Because of this, Jonesy, who now works at the Galleria Mall amusement park, suggests that his friends take a day off. He offers to sneak them in through a side entrance. While everyone is on board with this idea, Jen refuses to skip work. She has just gone off probation at the penalty box and doesn't want to end up being fired. The rest of the group is still in though and proceeds to call off work in various ways. Nikki gets out of work by telling her boss, Chrissy, that she wants to meet a friend. On the other hand, Wyatt escapes work by pretending to have a country music-induced migraine. Jude, meanwhile, sets up a mannequin of himself at Stiggett to avoid detection. And finally, Caitlin makes a sign claiming that she needed an emergency pedicure in order to get away from work. After calling in sick, the group of work ditchers meet back at the big squeeze but soon realize they're missing Jen. Jen is still refusing to take a day off from the penalty box. So the group decides that they'll have to force her to take time off from work. Nikki devises a plan to do so, and the group sets off to put it into action. This plan involves Jude and Wyatt as paramedics and an emergency phone call to the penalty box. Nikki's call to the penalty box involves her delivering a fake story about Jen's aunt having suffered a horrible injury. Although Coach Halder doesn't completely buy this story, he does call Jen over to the phone for a family emergency. When Jen comes to the phone, Nikki reveals the truth, but she refuses to leave work and hangs up. This prompts Nikki to move to Plan B. This plan involves Jude and Wyatt pretending to be paramedics. But when they're late to show up, however, Caitlin goes in pretending to be another one of Jen's relatives. Coach Halder is convinced by this performance and he lets Wyatt and Jude drag Jen out of the penalty box on a stretcher against her will. As soon as the group leaves, Coach Halder gets a call from Jonesy. In the call, Jonesy claims to be Jen's father and tells Coach Halder that Jen needs to come home in order to clean up the home. Upon hearing this, Coach Halder puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that he's been fooled. He then plays along with Jonesy's plan and agrees to send her home. But as soon as he hangs up, Coach Halder leaves the store to hunt down his insubordinate employee. Once outside of her work, Jen goes along with her friend's plan and soon starts having fun. Eventually, she gives in completely and accepts that she needs to take a day off from work. Furthermore, she adds that she never takes time off and he's crazy. Unfortunately for her, she utters these statements just as Coach Halder comes up behind her. The boss then promptly reprimands her for missing work and puts her back on probation. Episode 3, in the next scene, we see that Jen's driving test is coming up. Unfortunately, she can't help but keep remembering the incident that caused her to lose her previous job. She left the parking brake off in a school bus and it slid backwards, causing severe damage to the bus. As a result, she can't gain self-confidence and her nerves are frayed despite studying the driver's manual intensely. Meanwhile, Wyatt arrives at the big squeeze clad in an ugly brown aviator's jacket. Naturally, his friends make fun of him for his choice of outerwear, and Caitlin even offers to take him shopping for a nicer jacket. But Wyatt declines this offer because he believes the old jacket will bring him luck. Moreover, he desperately needs all the luck in the world, as he has an audition that night. At lunch, she visits Stiggett, where she meets Jude. He accurately guesses her problem and then offers to teach her how to drive. Although initially skeptical, she soon learns that Jude has a driver's license, and accepts his offer. On the other hand, Jonesy needs a new job once again as he quit his previous one because it was too dull for him. Jen informs him that the mall security guard, Rob, has posted a vacancy for an assistant and suggests that he take the job. Although Jonesy is reluctant to do so, he does need the money, so he eventually applies. There, Ron runs him through several examinations, including a sprint and a lie detector test, which Jonesy passes. The guard then presents him with the uniform and welcomes him into the mall security force. Back at the Stiggett, Jonesy warns Jen that she needs to follow his instructions without any questions. When Jen accepts the condition, Jude asks to see her driver's manual. After flipping through it, he casually tosses it into the trash and then informs Jen that she has to get some real experience. So the duo then head to the arcade, and there he sets her up in a driving video game, High Speed Manslaughter, which isn't actually about driving, but Jen does horribly at the game as she obeys all the rules of the road, even allowing an old man with a walker to overtake her. Meanwhile, Caitlin takes Wyatt's lucky jacket and hides it so that Wyatt realizes that he doesn't need it. When he comes to the big squeeze in search of his jacket, she misleads him by stating that she hasn't seen it. After he leaves, she takes it out to reassure herself that she's doing the right thing. Before she can hide the jacket, Nikki arrives and questions her. Caitlin reveals her reasoning for taking the jacket. While Nikki does not think that theft is a good idea, she accepts it as she wants to see how things will play out. Back at the arcade, Jude is not happy with Jen's relatively slow and steady performance. When Jen protests that she was just trying to be safe, he reveals the real reason why they're there. Driving is inherently unsafe, so practicing unsafe driving in a simulator will make Jen a better driver by preparing her for the real world. Surprisingly, this makes sense to Jen, and soon she starts playing the game in the manner that it's intended to be played. Eventually, Jen gets a high score on the game, proving her mastery to Jude. Meanwhile, Wyatt suffers through a string of bad luck. First, he is assigned to run 2 departments at Spin This, as his boss has just fired one of his co-workers, and this leaves him with no time to rehearse for his audition that night. He then starts to create a vicious spiral of worry for himself where he can't concentrate without his jacket. He then convinces Caitlin to give her friend his jacket back. And so she heads to the music store only to find that Wyatt never came back to work. On the other hand, Jonesy soon realizes that there are perks to this job. Being a member of the mall security, he attracts the attention of the beautiful young mother and extorts freebies from businesses. He then begins to live the high life and arrives at the arcade. Here he uses his authority as a mall cop to clear the area and takes Jen's place in the game. However, while he's concentrating on gaming, Jude asks him to clear some questions about his responsibilities. When Jonesy confirms that he has keys to a car on display in the mall, he asks for the keys and receives them from his distracted friend. With keys in hand, Jude leads Jen to the car, where she takes the wheel and gets ready to drive. However, when she shifts into gear and stomps on the accelerator, the car goes backwards. The car flies off of its pedals and into the fountain, nearly avoiding Wyatt. Meanwhile, Wyatt luckily happened to drop his CD player into the fountain and had bent down to get it, narrowly avoiding certain death. However, he gets soaking wet just 20 minutes before his audition, and at that exact moment, Caitlin and Nikki run up to Wyatt and point out how lucky he was to have avoided getting hit by the car. This convinces Wyatt that he doesn't need his jacket, but he takes the return jacket anyway, and then he happily goes off to his audition. Unfortunately for Jonesy, his generosity towards Jude proves to be his undoing. After the car crashes, Ron kicks him off the force and takes his uniform, leaving Jonesy jobless. On the other hand, Jen, however, has learned a valuable lesson: no driving lessons from Jude. Later, when Jen meets her friends at the food court, she goes back to work, studying the driving manual. However, Jude didn't come out as a loser, as he entered a raffle and won the second prize, a scooter. Ron doesn't like to see Jude tooling around the mall though, and soon confiscates the scooter from Jude. The mall guard explains that he was speeding, a surprisingly appropriate charge given Jude's teaching methods. Nikki, Wyatt, and Jonesy are all walking through the mall to the coffee shop Grind Me, when they come across a cutout of the band Mighty Weasels. Jonesy asks Nikki if she's bought tickets yet, to which Nikki reveals that she slept outside the mall in order to procure the tickets. Soon the group gets to Grind Me, where Jonesy hits on Charmaine, the new barista. But he's abruptly brought down by Wyatt, revealing that Jonesy doesn't have a job. However, Wyatt too ends up short of money for his coffee, but is helped out by his boss, Serena. Meanwhile, at the big squeeze, Caitlin is complaining to Jen about not being able to afford any new shoes. However, Jen is more concerned with the fact that Caitlin is very incompetent at her job. To make matters worse, when Jen tries to reason with her about operating the store properly, the lemon frame of the shop snaps down on Caitlin, shutting her in. On the other end of the mall, Jude is listening to the new Mighty Weasels album, when Nikki walks up and banters with him about the band. Wyatt then walks up to his friends and reveals some good news. He's managed to get 2 backstage passes to the Mighty Weasels concert. Both of his friends are impressed, but swiftly realize that only one of them will be able to go. As a result, Wyatt asks for time to choose between them. In the meantime, Caitlin finally manages to get the lemon to open up again. However, she sees a brand new sight: a giant lime stand named Party Lime right next to her store. The lime then pops open, revealing Jonesy as the guy running it. He heads over to Caitlin and invites her to party with him, and she eagerly accepts. To mark the opening of Jonesy's new store, she hands him a lemonade. However, when Jonesy takes a drink, he swiftly spits it out. Instead, he uses it to christen his own drink, the Party Lime. Soon, the two are working together to get the new store up and running. And then suddenly, Caitlin receives a call from Nikki, who's wondering what's going on. She fills her friend in on Jonesy's new job and then notices that Jude is getting a coffee and a cake. When Nikki hears this, she realizes that Jude doesn't drink coffee, so something else must be going on. She comes to the conclusion that Jude must be sucking up to Wyatt. And as a result, Nikki hangs up and goes to investigate Jude while Jonesy and Caitlin put the finishing touches on the store. When the Lime starts doing business, it is instantly popular with everyone. On the other hand, the Big Squeeze barely sees any new customers, and eventually, Caitlin decides it would be a better idea to close up shop and goes off to join the party. At this point, Big Steve, Caitlin's boss, shows up at the spot. Upon seeing his store shut down, he announces that they'll be moving to the East End strip mall if the sales don't pick up soon. This news sends Caitlin into a frenzy and she heads over to Jen for advice. The best advice that Jen can give is to do the best job that she can. But Caitlin doesn't think this is gonna be enough to overcome Jonesy's party, so she asks for party ideas. In response, Jen suggests Christmas in July, and the gullible Caitlin agrees to do it. She then calls Khaki Barn for some Christmas decorations in order to set up a Christmas party. Later that day, Nikki eavesdrops on Jude and Wyatt and confirms her suspicions. She then decides to compete with Jude for the backstage pass by sucking up just as hard. Soon she goes to spin this and does Wyatt's work for him. However, Jude too arrives at the store and reveals that he got his best friend the high score on a video game at the mall's arcade. Unfortunately though, nobody wants to celebrate Christmas in July, not even her friends, all of whom sneak off to Jonesy's party except Jen. And at that point, Jonesy comes over to invite Jen and Caitlin to a party, but is instantly brought down by the news that the Big Squeeze might be moving. He quickly figures out a solution. He'll crank up the party so far that he'll get his new store kicked out of the mall, and this will give Caitlin enough time to figure out how to make decent drinks. At the Spin It music store, lunchtime rolls around and Nikki plans to surprise Wyatt with sushi. However, when she arrives, she finds that Jude has already gotten Wyatt lunch, courtesy of Stiggit. When he has to leave to get mustard, Nikki sees her chance to get into Wyatt's good side. She then goes to Serena and talks good things about Wyatt. As Jude comes back, it seems like Nikki has won the competition. Back at the Big Squeeze, Caitlin dusts off the recipe book and finds out that she has been forgetting to add sugar to the lemonade. When she does so, the lemonade actually begins to actually taste good again. Meanwhile, the party just keeps getting more and more raucous. Eventually, Jonesy abandons the lime entirely in order to let the partygoers rampage even more freely. This leads them to rocking it back and forth, and eventually, the lime starts to roll through the food court, and it rolls straight at Jonesy and it stops on top of him. When Jonesy regains consciousness and looks up, he's at the feet of some middle-aged lady who owns the big lime. The lady announces that he is fired and that the lime will be removed from the mall. And this means that the party people are out of drink. Seeing her chance, Caitlin announces that she has plenty of drinks for the thirsty crowd, and she starts selling immense amounts of lemonade, which convinces Big Steve that the Big Squeeze can stay in the mall. After the people have cleared the food court, the gang can be found at their usual spots around the table. Wyatt points out that he is disappointed in how Jude and Nikki behaved for their backstage passes, and as a result, he won't be giving them a pass to either one of them. His argument is immediately undercut when Serena comes by and reveals that Wyatt is taking her to the concert instead. Hoo hoo hoo. And this leads to Jude and Nikki chasing Wyatt into the fountain, but their anger is immediately diminished when Serena reappears and calls him baby, impressing both of them. Episode 5. As Christmas time arrives, Caitlin tries to plan a holiday party, but Jen is uncooperative and snappish, and Caitlin notes this as unusual, and Jen admits that there's something else bugging her. This is the first Christmas that she's had since her parents divorced. On top of that, her mom is dating Jonesy's dad. Not only is she having trouble with her mother having a boyfriend, but she's having to stay with Jonesy's family for the holidays. At that moment, Jonesy arrives and announces that he may be taking up the job of the mall Santa. Seeing her friends depressed during Christmas, Caitlin suggests that the whole group get together after work to eat pizza and relax. Later, Jude is wrapping presents when Nikki arrives, followed by Caitlin and Jen, and it turns out that Jonesy got a Santa job. So Caitlin decides that they should visit him. However, one member is missing, so the group goes to get him. They find Wyatt and Grind Me in an exceedingly long line to buy his first coffee of the day. Unfortunately, just as he's about to take the first sip, a man bumps his hand and spills the coffee. When they get to Santa's village, the group finds that Jonesy has gotten a job there. However, he's not working as Santa. Instead, he's working as one of the elves. After the group mocks him for his ugly costume, they split up. Jen and Nikki go back to work, and Caitlin, Jude, and Wyatt go shopping. Wyatt and Jude head to the Khaki Barn and buy Caitlin's gift there. and in the meantime, Caitlin goes through the mall to buy Secret Santa presents for her friends to give to each other. And when she finishes, she goes to the penalty box to see Jen. And to her horror, she finds Jen even more stressed than before, even going so far as to snap at the mall Santa. Meanwhile, Jonesy gets fired from his job at Santa's village after being accused of hitting on a beautiful young mother. By the end of the day, everyone but Caitlin is fed up with Christmas. When Jonesy suggests that he could sneak them into a movie, Caitlin readily agrees. The group then heads off to the mall's movie hall, Gigantoplex. But they can't decide which movie to see when they get there. They draw straws and end up going to Jude's choice. Once they get snuck into the film, they realize there aren't any available seats, hence they decided to sit in the aisle but find it uncomfortable, and eventually the group is thrown out of the theater for making too much noise. Now, as the group walks back through the halls of the mall, Caitlin remembers that she forgot their presents at the Big Squeeze, and this soon turns out to not be their most pressing concern as they get lost in the back ways. When they finally find a way out, they're in the food court with the lights off and the mall shut down, as it closed at 3 for Christmas Eve. Immediately, bickering starts again, and this causes Caitlin to cry as she's fed up with her friends' constant quarreling. And this leads to a fight almost starting between Jonesy and Jen, which Caitlin diffuses when she points out that they're lucky to have siblings. Jen and Jonesy then make up, and the friends all hug. Wyatt then remembers that Jonesy took a copy of Ron's master key when he worked for mall security, and they tell him to let him out. Jonesy has other plans, however. After all, they're the only ones in the mall and have a free run of the place. The friends then proceed to run off and have a good time. Along the way, they find their presents donated to charity and decide to let the presents be given away. When they finally leave for their respective homes and Christmas celebrations, they promise to try making getting locked into the mall a Christmas tradition. After Christmas, they gather by the Big Squeeze, happy that the holiday is over. Jonesy has big news too. Jen won their family turkey eating contest, and everybody's happy and content that the Christmas rush is over. But as the clock strikes 10 to open the mall, they realize there's going to be another big celebration coming up, as it's Boxing Day. Episode 6. A few months later, she discovers another downside of her job, and she can't get a date because of her stupid work hat. To make matters worse, a guy she likes, Kyle, comes by and orders a lemonade, and she makes a fool of herself, and she sprays herself with lemon juice and drops pulp all over him, and he angrily storms off. And this depresses her, and even her friends showing up at the Big Squeeze don't help cheer her up. However, Jen has good news and offers a lifeline for Caitlin's romantic aspirations. The man of her affection, Kyle Donaldson, was recently at the penalty box checking out a tennis racket, since he will be returning the racket that afternoon. Jen then makes an arrangement with Caitlin. When Kyle comes by, she'll call, and Caitlin can accidentally bump into Kyle. Later that day, Kyle enters the penalty box as planned, and Jen immediately calls Caitlin and abandons the customer she's helping in order to stall Kyle until her friend arrives. While Jen manages to accomplish this, Caitlin seamlessly joins the conversation. However, she accidentally bashes Kyle on the head with a tennis racket while fiddling with it, and Caitlin swiftly apologizes, but Jen recognizes that Kyle is slightly dazed and turns Caitlin's lemons into lemonade by suggesting the duo go out on a date. Meanwhile, at Khaki Barnes, Nikki is her usual surly, unhelpful self. However, when the store in charge, Chrissy, has to leave work early due to an emergency, she leaves another employee, Kristen, in charge, and Nikki complains about this decision and is ultimately handed the reins of the shop with the caveat, if anything goes wrong, it'll be on her head. She isn't worried though, as she's happy to take the management position and use the opportunity to simply slack off. While Nikki is busy doing absolutely nothing in her job, she receives a call from Caitlin, who laments about not having a dress for her date. And upon hearing her dilemma, Jonesy chimes in. Huntington's, where he's been hired, has just unveiled its spring collection, and he's certain that he can help Caitlin find something she likes. When Caitlin goes to the store, she does indeed find something that suits her, a tight pink dress. Unfortunately, the price of the outfit is more than she makes in a month. While she could charge it to her mother's account, she knows her parents will get a bill at the end of the month, and Jonesy has a completely legal solution that involves the store's 7-day return policy. Caitlin will simply wear the dress, leave the tags on, and return it the next day, reversing the charges. That night, Kyle arrives at the penalty box to pick up Caitlin for their date, and as they are leaving the store, they pass by Jonesy and Wyatt, who have come in to see Jen. As Jonesy passes Kyle, he realizes that he knows the guy but can't remember who exactly he is. When Jen mentions his name, Jonesy finally makes a connection. Kyle Donaldson is Dirty Donaldson, who is known to all three of them as a legendary womanizer. Jen is shocked to hear this, as she has heard of him before but hadn't realized it until now. However, Jen soon decides on a plan of action to make sure that Caitlin doesn't get torn apart by her date. She then orders Jonesy and Wyatt to tell Caitlin just in case things go wrong. Soon, Jonesy and Wyatt are seated at a sushi restaurant to keep an eye on their friend, who is also here with Kyle. Kyle orders fish and Caitlin gulps down a piece despite hating the taste. Upon noticing something resembling a vegetable, she instantly goes for it and it turns out to be wasabi, and she immediately starts choking. When her mouth is set aflame by the spicy condiment, Kyle watches her hack and cough, and Kyle finally decides to help her by feeding her fish to help take the taste of wasabi away. In the meantime, Nikki is having a terrible time at her job. A sale that she didn't know about has brought in hundreds of customers. Soon she finds herself worrying about things she's never worried about before, such as the chaos in the store and the mixing of sizes and piles of clothing left behind by rushing customers, and eventually it hits her that the responsibility is turning her into Chrissy, and she runs away. Back at the date, Caitlin ends up paying for the meal because Kyle forgot his wallet. To try to make it up to her, Kyle blindfolds her and leads her to a surprise. But when he takes the blindfold off, Caitlin is anything but happy to see it. His surprise is a visit to the amusement park and a ride on the Vomit Comet. She initially refuses to ride, citing that roller coasters make her sick. But when it looks like Kyle will take the ride with a pretty girl, she swallows her fears and boards the ride. Predictably, Caitlin's fishy dinner and wild ride combine to make Vomit Comet live up to its name. When the roller coaster pulls back up to the boarding area, everyone on the ride is splattered with vomit as Caitlin pukes throughout the ride. Kyle is not happy and he storms away despite her pleas. When Caitlin collapses onto a bench, Wyatt and Jonesy go up to cheer her up. Caitlin is predictably sad about her failed date, but Wyatt points out that it was a horrible date for her anyway, and he then explains that Kyle didn't even have the courtesy to ask whether she liked sushi or, for that matter, roller coasters. Upon hearing this, Caitlin realizes that Kyle actually was the wrong date. She cheers up when she realizes that she might just have dodged a bullet. However, she is soon brought down as a puke mark stains her dress, and Jonesy assures her that his stint at a dry cleaner gave him the ability to erase the stain from her dress, allowing her to return it anyway. The next day, we find out that Jonesy's dry cleaning experience was not as informative as he thought. As a result, Caitlin has to keep the dress, and Jonesy ends up getting fired. Despite this, he's in a good mood, as he was able to cheer up a friend the previous night. Plus, Nikki has a plan in place to make sure that Kyle won't be able to get as many dates in the future. She intentionally sets Kyle Donaldson up with ill-fitting pants and flatters him into purchasing several pairs. Episode 7. Jonesy begins bragging about having secured a cool new job at a tech store. Things that beep. Her friends start to wonder how he manages to get a new job despite repeatedly being fired. Right then, Wyatt snatches Jonesy's resume to look for a clue. He finds that it's full of false accolades that his friend has never really received. Suddenly, Blade and Crystal arrive on the spot and invite Jonesy to go skydiving with them since his resume says he is a junior skydiving champion. Meanwhile, Jen receives a free slushie from the Big Squeeze. When she tries to give Caitlin her money, Caitlin waves her off, stating that drinks are on the house for her friends. Naturally, this statement offended Jen's moral sensibilities, and she rushes off to tell her friends about the incident. However, she learns that all of them have taken stuff from their workplaces. Jude absconds with the occasional hot dog from Stick-It, and Wyatt has taken demo CDs from Spin This, and even Nikki took socks from the Khaki Barn. Later that day, Jude heads into Things That Beep to see Jonesy on his first day of work. While there, he falls into a massage chair and discovers that it can talk to him in an alluring feminine voice. Soon, Jude falls in love with the chair and starts treating it as though it's his girlfriend. Nikki and Wyatt are unhappy with this new development and are set out to get him a girlfriend. Elsewhere at the penalty box, Jen is distracted by a new piece of merchandise in the store, a beautiful new jacket. She tries it on to pretend for a moment that she can't afford it, and immediately she catches the attention of a cute guy named Carson, and her desire to get the jacket strengthens. Later, she chats about her day with Jonesy and sees a girl walk by with the jacket on. When she laments about not being able to afford it, the latter suggests that she should use the employee's discount to buy the merchandise. Jen points out that her discount won't help much, but Joan indicates that she could simply steal it. At that moment, Carson arrives on the spot and compliments her jacket, thus the idea becomes even more firmly implanted in her mind. Later that day, Coach Halter punishes her for slacking off at work. Infuriated, Jen makes her decision, and that night, she steals the jacket. On the other hand, Jonesy keeps messing up at his new job. He is continuously placed in positions he is not competent enough to handle because he lied on his resume, and the situations range from him having to help a customer who only speaks German to operating a stereo incorrectly and driving off a customer. None of these failures get him fired for the moment. While this all happens, Jen shows up at the Big Squeeze with her brand new jacket. However, her friends are not impressed with her law-breaking behavior and reprimand her for stealing. Jen finds herself stumbling around, trying to find an excuse for her theft. The only reason that she could come up with is that Jonesy convinced her to commit the act. The argument is interrupted by Carson. who actually asks her out on a date later that afternoon. Jen goes out with Carson but finds herself unable to have a good time as she's paranoid about getting caught with the jacket. Later at work, she hears Coach Halter reprimanding the wrong store associate about the theft, and as a result, Jen decides that she has to return the jacket and enlist her friends to help her. That night, they keep watch to ensure security guard Ron doesn't catch her sneaking around the mall after hours. Thankfully, Jen manages to weasel into the penalty box and hides the jacket under a pile of clothes. The next day, Nikki and Wyatt take a girl who works at Nice Cinnabons on a blind date with Jude. When she finds out that he is in love with the chair, she walks out even before the date begins. On a positive note, Jonesy sells the chair and the friends hope that Jude's infatuation finally comes to an end. But he ends up even more heartbroken and starts sobbing in front of the store. After his friends leave him to grieve alone, he meets Star, the server at the Vegan Island restaurant. She perfectly understands Jude's pain as she went through the same thing with her mother throughout her old desk lamp. Upon hearing this, Jude looks at Star and suggests that they get drinks together. Back at the penalty box, Coach Halter reveals to Jen that he found the missing jacket under a pile of hockey gloves. Upon hearing this, she cheerfully remarks that the jacket must not have been stolen. Coach Halter tells her that he might have thought the same thing until he saw an unauthorized entry code from the previous night, and then he pulls out the photos from the security footage, and Jen's crime comes out for everyone to see. To her surprise, he respects her for returning the jacket and doesn't fire her. Instead, she and her friends are punished for 15 minutes in the penalty box. A few weeks later, Jonesy is in Jen's workplace, looking to purchase a football. At that moment, a cute guy arrives and grabs her attention. Jen is instantly smitten with him. Things only get better when she learns that he's going to be her new co-worker, and because of this, she starts to give him tips on the job, the most important being that the boss is a giant bonehead. As she explains the store's rules, the giant bonehead arrives and introduces the new guy as his son, Corey Halter. Elsewhere, Wyatt is in the electric store. Stereo Shack. Looking for audio equipment, Jonesy puts a lightsaber through an expensive speaker while fooling around with the toy. At first, the store's manager, Darth, reprimands him and wants to call mall security, but Wyatt has a better, cheaper idea for both of them. Soon, Jonesy is working at Stereo Shack to pay the store back for the equipment he broke. Unbeknownst to the teenager, Darth is somebody Jonesy picked on through most of middle school. While he may not remember much of it, Darth certainly does. His employment there soon turns into a lightsaber duel with Darth. The latter handily wins and caps off with a wedgie. Initially, Jonesy is relieved that nobody saw him get humiliated by a nerd, but it turns out that the security camera caught the entire battle. Unfortunately for him, Darth takes full advantage of the situation. He'll have to do whatever Darth says if he doesn't want the video to get out. Meanwhile, Jen asks Corey out for lunch and he readily agrees. However, their date turns out to be a total flop. Corey is incredibly self-absorbed and spends his time talking about himself or watching sports. When he takes a break to use the bathroom, Jen gets a call from Caitlin. She asks how the date is going and Jen has an easy answer. It's the worst date she's ever been on. After the date, she talks to her friends about wanting to break up with him. However, her friends warn her this may not be a good idea. Corey is her boss's son and may use this relationship to get her fired. This worries Jen. She doesn't want to be stuck with him forever. Thankfully, Caitlin has a suggestion to get her out of a bad relationship. Simply turn into a horrible girlfriend. To do this, Jen asks the guys what would they suggest, and they give her a laundry list of ideas. They suggest she gets matching outfits, be clingy, use an overly complicated pet name for her boyfriend. And when we return to Stereo Shack, Jonesy tries to strike a deal with Darth. He asks for the tape to be deleted in return for anything that his colleague wants. It turns out that Darth does indeed have something that he dearly wants. A date with Nikki. Jonesy believes this will be hard to pull off, but agrees to the deal nonetheless. He then attempts to get Nikki to do a blind date and eventually wears her down into accepting. In the next scene, Jen is on a date with Corey and she implements all the suggestions that her friends gave her. Initially, it seems to be working. However, instead of hating everything that Jen is doing, Corey enjoys how she's acting and to some extent starts reciprocating. Jen excuses herself to call Kaylin and rants that the plan backfired. When Kane insinuates that she might not be able to lose Corey, Jen decides to crank the clingy act to even higher levels. To further this, she takes Corey to an over-the-top girly store, frilly and pink where everything is soft and pink. Instead of being disgusted by the girliness of the store, he is fascinated by the softness of a pashmina shawl. In fact, he likes the store so much that he buys Jen a bunch of the stuff from it. In the meantime, Nikki shows up at the food court for her blind date, but when she sees who her date is, she immediately turns around to leave. Darth is saddened by this, but accepts that Jonesy only did it because of the videotape. This piques Nikki's interest, and within minutes, she and Darth are at Stereo Shack, setting up a humiliation for Jonesy. Now we get to shift back to Jen, who decides to let Corey know how she really feels. Unfortunately, when she does this, she's right next to the microphone at Stick It, and at the same moment, an electrical short circuit caused by Nikki causes the microphone to switch on, and as a result, the entire mall hears Jen dumping Corey. However, the latter isn't offended by this confession. Turns out he wanted to leave her as well, but his father told him not to because she could conceivably sue the store for harassment. He and Jen then go their separate ways, with a clear understanding that they're not dating anymore. At the Stereo Shack, Darth fixes the electric circuit. He then broadcasts the video of him wedging Jonesy on the mall's jumbo screen. To make matters worse for Jonesy, the entire mall sees his humiliation, and the girl he's on a date with sees it too. She walks away from him while laughing at his indignity. The next day, the gang gathers by the big squeeze, and Jen reveals that Corey transferred to a different location. So things aren't weird at the penalty box. Nikki adds that she got the tape of Jonesy's humiliation by paying off his debt. Unbeknownst to her, Jonesy has an ace up his sleeve, a picture of Nikki tap dancing in first grade. He shows it to the gang and then takes off as Nikki chases after him. Episode 9. A few months later, Jude and Jonesy are hanging around the former's workplace. Jonesy informs his friend that he's picked up a great job, mall secret shopper. Not only does he get paid to go around the mall, but he's found a way to receive bribes from the stores by letting it slip that he's the secret shopper. He then gets Jude to give him some free noodles as a bribe. After having the noodles, he heads over to the khaki barn, where he gets Chrissy to offer him some free pants, and in return, he hooks her with some fake information. She'd be a shoo-in for Manager of the Year if it were not for one of her salespeople always lagging behind in sales. This convinces Chrissy to fire that salesperson, who is Nikki in her mind. However, when Jonesy finds out that his friend is on the chopping block, he comes up with a backup plan. He manages to convince Chrissy to train her employee instead of firing her. Chrissy eventually agrees and hatches a plan to bring Nikki into line. After Jonesy finishes at the khaki barn, he heads to see Jude again at Stick It. There, the duo have a conversation about the owner of the store, who none of them have ever seen before, and suddenly, Jude realizes that his boss doesn't know what a good job he's doing and decides to search for him. Jonesy gives him the owner's phone number before heading to the next store, Soft and Lacy. Back at the khaki barn, Chrissy begins the first step in her plan to bring Nikki under control, make her the employee of the month. This new position is a shock to everyone, as Nikki was the worst performing salesperson of the bunch. Being employee of the month shocks her too. Later she tells her friends about it, and they react with the appropriate amount of mockery. At work, things get even odder as Chrissy starts to treat her as a confidant. Even the customers start listening to Nikki's opinion on the clothes. Being employee of the month is starting to change Nikki too, as she finds herself doing work when she's not paying attention. As the day goes on, Nikki starts helping customers more and more and eventually blurts out the store's goodbye, have a khaki day unironically. As soon as she does this, Chrissy comes over to congratulate her on her improvement over the past day. She then tells Nikki to take a break and gives her access to the special Employee of the Month private lounge. When Nikki enters the lounge, she finds it to be a minimalist white space with perfumes and a retractable toilet. When she sits on it, a computer scans her and objects to her facial jewelry. However, Nikki does not get upset by the computer's invasion. In fact, she seems entranced by it. She does so without a fight when it demands that she removes her piercings. Meanwhile, the secret shopper Jonesy heads over to spin this, where he scams some free CDs. With the cat out of the bag to Wyatt, he then goes to the penalty box where he tries to get free stuff from Jen. Unfortunately for him, Jen is in the mood for his tricks. She refuses to believe that he claims to be the secret shopper, even going so far as to threaten him with bodily harm if he doesn't leave. The next time that the group meets at the big squeeze, Jen informs her friends of Jonesy's prank. However, Wyatt reveals that Jonesy isn't lying. He really is the mall's secret shopper, and this convinces Jen to make it up to Jonesy, and she does so by giving him any merchandise that he asks for. Later that day, a wholly changed Nikki swings by the big squeeze to see her friends. They notice her new demeanor and are completely taken aback by her dress-up. When she returns to work, they follow and see her happily working hard. They watch as she helps Coach Halter out before she slips into the Employee of the Month lounge. They secretly rush in behind her before anyone can notice them. They attempt to reason with her, but Nikki refuses to listen. Seeing no other option, Caitlin slaps her repeatedly and yells at her to wake up, and this snaps Nikki out of her brainwashed fugue as she decides to set things straight. Following this, she undoes her ponytail, puts the jewelry back in, and yells at Chrissy. Jonesy comes in just in time to be greeted by an angry Nikki who refuses to help. As a result, he marks down the khaki barn, dropping Chrissy's chances of becoming Manager of the Year. Nikki comes to know about this, and she steals Jonesy's pet and rewrites all the reviews. After all the fiasco, the gang again meets up at the big squeeze, and Joni reveals that he lost his job as the secret shopper thanks to Nikki rewriting his reviews. Meanwhile, Jen takes her revenge by using a piece of merchandise she gave Jonesy to beat him up. In the final scene, Jude calls the phone number Jonesy provided using his cell phone. To his surprise, the phone that rings is the Stick It phone. Jude finally realizes that he is his boss. He then congratulates himself for doing a good job and takes the afternoon off to go to the movies with Jonesy.